Hello everyone and welcome back to Navis Nobilite. I am Captain Zelnick and this is the first video in the tutorial video series of Battlefleet Gothic, talking to you about elements of the game and how to play the game properly. Now, I will have a link to not only the Discord channel, but to the source rules for Battlefleet Gothic. Recognize, please, everybody, that we are playing Battlefleet Gothic, the original game, the only Battlefleet Gothic game that is official and should be played, especially by new players. This does not apply to XR or Battlefleet Gothic 2020 or any other form of fan-made product. This is Battlefleet Gothic, not a fan game, and it is the most up-to-date and most accepted version of the rules. Anybody who tells you that XR is official is lying to you. Now, moving on to the basic principles of Battlefleet Gothic. Battlefleet Gothic is a game about space battles. Space battles between gigantic monolithic ships that float through space with guns the size of skyscrapers, firing bullets as big as skyscrapers themselves at each other in incredibly inefficient but very cinematic manners. A lot of people talk about how big space is. Space in Battlefleet Gothic is the Douglas Adams reference, which is space is big, really big. Space is in fact so big that it is impossible really for the human mind to comprehend. And in many cases, Battlefleet Gothic kind of waves over some of the elements of size and scale, mostly because if they had things all to scale, you would be playing with a miniature the size of maybe one of the escorts, firing across a parking lot at a enemy ship to get some idea of just how big the game really is playing in. So they do give some references in the rulebook about what the distances that you are measuring mean. And the best reference that it gave me was a 60 centimeter range weapon, which is pretty common in the game, can fire effectively between the Earth and the Moon with accuracy. So that should give you some idea of just the ridiculous scale of distance that we're talking here. Because it took like 3 days for the American astronauts just to get to the moon and another 3 days to get back. And these weapons are firing, in effect, shooting across that distance with high accuracy, though it is also described that many of these weapons take several hours to reach their destination. So while there is a lot of fluff that describes just the time differential between firing and waiting for it to hit, and then waiting for the light from the explosions to get back to you to see how well you fired. Ultimately, for the player, the game functions much like old style galleon combat from the age of pirates or the age of great naval battles between England and Spain or England and France. So lots of broadside combat. There's other fleets move into other domains that are more reminiscent of things like World War I or World War II, or even in some cases more modern combat as you get into other alien races. And some, of course, just break all the rules because Eldar always have broken all the rules. Now, another big question that comes up is this game 3D? And the answer is sort of. Space being the size that it is, in order to make the game playable, there is one plane of play, and that is typically the table. Hopefully you're playing it on a table, but if you're playing on the floor or you're playing on a desk somewhere, you can expect that ultimately you're going to be moving across that two-dimensional plane. I would actually call the game 2.5D because ultimately the ships that in question do move above and below each other as they move across the board. And if a ship moves over another ship's base, you're going to basically have to expect that, these are piloted by people who know what they're doing. They are floating above and below of one another, depending on the distance. But it is not a perfect 3D game, and it's a little bit more than a 2D game. Now, again, we're going to talk about elements of scale. The ships that you see are not representative of how large the ships are in the game. If you look at this lunar cruiser here on the board, that I have provided. By the way, this is Vassal. If any of you want to learn how to use Vassal, by all means, come to the Battlefleet Gothic Discord. They have a full description of how to use it, and you can play Battlefleet Gothic very, very accurately online with your friends who may be very far away. I may even be able, if I have the time and the energy, show you how to use it at some point. But regardless, you have a lunar class cruiser, and you can see that it's resting on a certain size base. Now, the cruiser itself is a teeny tiny dot on top of a teeny tiny dot right over here. I'm going to shift the screen just a little bit. My apologies. Right at the center of this base. It's just a dot. The ship you see is simply a representation of the ship in question. Now, what does that mean for the base? The base represents the area of space around the ship that the ship can be affected by area of effect situations like stellar phenomena, torpedoes, bombers, or any kind of ordnance. All it has to do is touch the base, and it is close enough for it to potentially affect the ship. Also, things like boarding actions. That means that, of course, there is a very large amount of space that a very tiny little ship is being affected by. Now, there are two base sizes. The larger base size is generally used for larger ships because bigger ships can be affected by more stuff simply due to their mass. Now, there are ways for you to take a larger base on a smaller ship. That usually depends on if it is a cruiser or some unique cases in regards to certain other fleets. But ultimately, for now, recognize the base as the area of space around the ship that can be affected by area of effect and stellar phenomena and ordnance. The ship itself is a tiny dot at the very center of this base. And this is why, for direct fire weapons like Nova cannons, like lances, like batteries, bombardment cannons, heavy guns, any form of weapon that uses direct fire and not the ordnance phase, measures from the center stem to the center stem of the enemy, because that is the distance that the weapons have to travel in order to strike the enemy. You also measure movement from the center stem to the center stem. So when you move 5 centimeters, you are measuring 5 centimeters from the center and moving to the center to give you the idea of how movement ultimately works. But we will get into the idea of movement in another video. So, the basic principle of the game. This is all about understanding that the distances, the space, the basic core principles of what the game is meant to be played like. Now, in the next video, we're going to go on to the next core principles, which are going to be elements of what the different ship classes mean, movement, and it relates to those classes, and other things. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I'll see you all again very soon.